Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principle. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the social medias at Jethro Jones. We're continuing our collaboration with Reading is Fundamental. Today, we're going to have Dr. Daris McInnis on the program. He is an assistant professor of literacy at the College of Education and Social Work at West Chester University of Pennsylvania. His research interests include family literacy, reading research, critical literacy, family school partnerships, and early childhood education. Daris holds a doctorate in reading, writing, and literacy from the University of Pennsylvania and serves on multiple advisory boards with Reading is Fundamental. And he previously taught early elementary grades in Washington, D.C., and currently volunteers as a reading specialist in Newcastle County, Delaware. He's also a Pat Tillman Scholar and an Army veteran who served 5 years on active duty as an ordnance logistics officer. Daris, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. What's a big takeaway from you about what we talk about today?
Today is an opportunity for all of us to rethink and reimagine who has power, whose lives, whose experience, whose language, and whose knowledge counts. To be transformative, we must be willing to step out of our comfort zones, what we believe to be the universal truths in education, and actually take a more equitable and asset-based approach and inviting folks who we wouldn't have even imagined inviting into a space where we can be collaborative to learn from them, to learn alongside them, and to learn more about how to serve their children.
Yeah, I love that. My big takeaway is we really get down to doing things that are focused on individuals. Instead of making broad, sweeping ideas about things, what we really need to do is we need to get down and say, what does this individual need? What does this individual family need? And I think that's so powerful. I'm really grateful for this partnership with Reading is Fundamental. We get to talk with great people like Daris, and you can hear all of the interviews that we're doing at literacy.bpodcast.network. And we'll get to my interview with Daris here in just a minute. Daris, talk to us about families teaching their kids how to read and the role of the school and supporting families in that and what that looks like.
Sure. So the reading process is incredibly complex. And I know that most people think that it starts in school, but it actually doesn't. It starts at home. It starts in conversations that parents have with their kids reading things around their home, looking at labels, different things in their environment, stop signs if they're walking around their neighborhood or they're in the car. And I think that to me, my perspective on this is that children and families, as children are young and as they're learning how to communicate with each other, how to communicate with their families, they're understanding sort of the building blocks of literacy. And then at school, what we do is we teach them the formal mechanisms of how to do that with text, handwriting, with vocabulary. Where I think a disconnect is coming into play, though, is assuming that we teach kids the formal processes of writing and of reading, that we are somehow the go to experts for everything. My argument to that is that actually, though we do have expertise, parents also have expertise. Very often, their expertise is not included in our instruction and curriculum and decisions in the classroom. And I think that we can do a better job of trying to be more creative with inviting them into the classroom so that when we have these conversations about, as I was saying before, these origins of how language develops, how literacy, how it develops over time, if we can be more creative with how to invite parents in as opposed to keeping them out of these spaces, I think the kids would fare better in schools.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's one of the things that I've been harping on for a long time is that education is the responsibility of the families and we just step in to assist them. And whenever I bring that up, there's always this visceral reaction from educators that no, we're the experts, we're doing it. But the reality is that that education starts the moment that child is conceived, and it continues well past the time that those kids are going to be in our schools. And so inviting the parents in and making it part of the process is making them part of the process is incredibly valuable for us to do as educators, because we're really just going into their space, and we need to recognize their expertise as well. Will you talk a little bit more about that parent expertise? Because we oftentimes think because they're not educated and they don't know the science of reading, that they have no idea what they're doing. And I just think that's wrong.
Sure. So to your point too, it's we must be committed to doing this on a consistent basis as well, because we never have the same children in front of us. Every year we have different kids with different needs, different ideas. And I think that one of the things that parents, a very untapped resource for parents, I mean, there's so many, and I know that we don't have enough time to go through all of them. One of them though is the parents' knowledge of how their everyday lives shape who they are. So, what I mean by that is when I conducted my dissertation research, one of the things that I found to be so interesting was one of the parents, she was able to tell me. So, I collected my data during COVID times. And so, the prices of food and goods were going up and down. And I would have to, in all of my privilege as a person who's in the middle class, I would have to either go onto Instacart or to DoorDash or something like to look at like the prices of and things like that. But one of my parents, I distinctly remember she could tell me at any point in time the price of a gallon of milk, the price of a carton of eggs at multiple different grocery stores throughout the city. And it is because, I mean, she had to know those prices. She built her whole budget and everything that they did around being so knowledgeable of not just the price of food, but the schedule of the buses, how long it takes for you to get something in the mail. And I think that for schools, I think this type of knowledge about the community, so many of us are we're so completely just what is the word I'm looking for? We are so completely ignorant to what's happening to the communities right in our own backyards, and not just the like the prices of food. I mean, so many different things that the families we serve go through. And I think that perhaps, and I don't know what this would look like in town hall or something, but I think that parents have so much more knowledge of the community because they are of the community. They rely on the community. They are the most productive citizens in the community. They have so many different resources at their disposal. But I think the issues is that their knowledge is not considered valuable or intellectual because it's not been quote unquote peer reviewed or it's not been certified by a university or a big think tank. From their linguistic expressions to the ways in which they're able to scaffold material for their kids. So, I mean, I really could spend a really long time with going over those things.
Well, and the thing that I think is so fascinating about that, and then we'll move on a minute, is the idea that we have some sort of expertise because we have a college degree or have research to back it up or whatever, really takes out this whole section of life, which I learned from Dr. Mindy Beer, which is grandma statistics, which is evidence based on experience, that we can't discount that. And we have to recognize that may be different from something that's research based or something that has a study attached to it. But the fact of the matter is, people's lives matter and what they've experienced does matter. And a parent will know, well, this is how my kid understands the world, and I may need to say something differently to help them put it in the right context. And if we can listen to that, it's going to be so much better for our students. So let's talk a little bit about how some of these barriers to student literacy at home work and what educators can do to address those.
Sure. Many of the barriers low income folks go through, so many of them are unseen. And I think that this is where the power of research can help to shine a light on these, particularly for folks who are trusted by members of the community. I think that one barrier that really stands out to me is the assumption that parents have everything that they need that we have in the classroom to support their kids' learning. And so, one of the things that I think COVID taught us was that, not everyone has access to reliable internet. Not everyone has access to a computer. Not everyone has access to even a phone or can log on to the internet and just retrieve things. So sometimes, if at a school, if your main sort of for communication is through email or in a group or sorry, like a social media group like Facebook or a group chat, there's a good chance that you may miss someone because they don't have access to those things. And another barrier is the assumption that people have time. Very often in Title One schools, parents just they don't have time. Many of them are working several jobs, some of whom are single parents. They can afford to just take a day off, right, to go to a parent teacher conference when we schedule it. They may not necessarily be able to take a phone call when it is convenient for us. And to the point that I was saying before, maybe if they do have access to the internet and you post something in, a class app or, like a social media group, maybe they didn't get a chance to read it, and so rather than assuming that these folks are just uninvolved or don't care about their kids' education, I think positive intent and having a positive outlook and an asset based perspective on who they are, and just assuming, again, going back to the positive intent, assuming that they do have their kids' best interest at heart, I think can help us rethink how do we navigate these barriers because for many people, they can't change their circumstances.
So many times we interpret silence or a lack of response as something other than what it is, which is just silence or a lack of response. And one of the things that I see in education is this idea of making assumptions like what you're talking about of they don't have time, they're working too many jobs, or they don't have the money or the resources or whatever, rather than actually getting to know the parents and understanding what their real limitations are, what their real challenges are. We just lump them into these, well, it's a Title One school, therefore they must be working a ton and they don't have time, or they must be working two jobs. When we make those broad statements, but that may not be the case for this particular student. And so we also make excuses based on those things rather than realizing that one particular group may be much different than another group, and that it's bigger than what we can conveniently and easily say as a group. Well, it's Title One school, this must be the problem, and that's not always the
Right.
case.
Exactly. And, they're not monolithic, right? Different families have different needs. And to your point, I think that this is the value of bringing folks in and giving them a seat at the table where we actually can learn more about what is their day-to-day life like and hearing from them identify what do they perceive to be as a barrier for their kids, what do they need from the school district. And I mean, as many folks know, many of us start out the school with we design the PD for our teachers, we design the calendar, we design everything with us and our needs and our schedule in mind, when in fact, it might be more helpful to plan for the next school calendar with the parents and the caretakers of our kids at the table planning with us. There may be even some cultural things or some celebrations that they may have in mind during like a certain time of year. Or it may be hard for people to get childcare for certain times of the year. Or, perhaps the parents may want to come and visit the classroom or see their kids' portfolios or their work, but we don't allow for opportunities for that to happen. And so I think we really do have an opportunity to really change who is the expert here and who gets access to building these things for our kids.
Yeah. And you brought up a couple of things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, that our school day, like you said, is designed for the convenience of the people that are working there. And it may be that a better school day could start at 10 o'clock in the morning and end at 4 or 5 o'clock at night. And that might be better for your community. And the only way to figure that kind of stuff out is to engage with and talk with people and see what will actually work for them. And it is so challenging and so complex. And for sure, that's not like, I'm not saying just change the school day from 10 to 5 and you'll be fine. No, not at all. I'm saying talk to the people that you're working with and say, what is it that you guys need? It may be that 2 weeks off at Christmas time is not what your community needs. Maybe they need 3 weeks off. Maybe they need just half days during that time. And some of those things might be worthwhile to make decisions about, and other things might not make any sense at all to change. And it's okay to at least have the conversation about what that could look like. Now, we're here specifically talking about literacy, so let's take it to that specific point of what does it look like to help them with literacy? What do they need from us to help with literacy? And sometimes that means they just need books, other times that means they need someone to read to their kids. What other things around literacy specifically should we really be asking questions about?
Sure. So, Jethro, I think that in order to address the needs of, so I think for this, I would just call this school-based literacy, just in the context of their literacy acquisition as we define it, because as you know, as folks know, because literacy is language, it is perspectives of the world. And so just keeping this conversation localized around school-based literacy, I think the first thing is to address like what these broader issues are for the parents that they may be dealing with, things like unemployment, things like food insecurity, or things like anxiety around this. You know, they may just feel anxious, or perhaps there are some folks who may not be able to read and write in English themselves. I think once we tackle the broader issues, I think we have to do the homework of collaborating with different folks around our communities and different organizations. So, for instance, and not to just plug RIF, but I am a really big fan of RIF and the resources that RIF has available. So, on the website, we have different read aloud guides for parents that parents can use with their kids. And I think that schools can use this as like a model. And I know that there are a lot of school districts that do design some activities for things for their kids to do at home. I think other opportunities are, I am a really big fan of like these literacy nights that schools do. I think that it's valuable for many reasons. One of them just being a chance to connect and to really build and to collaborate between school and home. But also, it's an opportunity to show parents this is how we teach something like guided reading. This is how we do a read aloud. You know, we hold the book in front of the child and we ask them some questions. Usually, those questions are open ended. This is the reason why we do that. This is how we teach them phonics. This is how we teach them vocabulary and fluency. And you may want to consider labeling things around your house just so that they're able to, you know, recall these words a little easier, recognize them a little easier, build them and add them into their sight word bank, as we like to call it in education, so that the kids aren't constantly trying to sound out each word as they're reading it. They're able to quickly to recognize the words. The last part of it is, I think, to think about how do we actually, rather than trying to correct kids' grammar or to correct the way that people speak, I think inviting all different types of linguistic expression into the classroom and perhaps maybe even doing a little bit of our own. I had a child when I taught pre-K with my friend Leanne, a student who was from Russia, in our class, and he taught me how to say please and hi and thank you. I think it's crazy that I still remember that. But you know, just some little things like, I mean, just everyday conversations with our kids and interactions, and really just try to bring their culture into our classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. As a side note, I do speak Russian because I lived there for 2 years. So I
Did- was that right?
it was pretty close, is how you say that, but
Spasiba.
close
Thank
enough.
you. Thank you.
The thing is, like, that little effort really goes a long way in allowing students to say thank you in their native language and you saying it in their native language. Those are little things that help a lot. And what's so fascinating is having kids come in and not be able to understand English but be very proficient in their native language, and parents as well. And this is an area where, especially when you have a lot of students from other countries that speak other languages, it becomes something where they appear dumb because they don't speak the same language as us, but they can, in fact, be quite smart. And I've had many parents that I've talked with who we need a translator, but they were exceptionally literate in their native language, and because they were immigrants they just could not, they didn't have command of the language yet, and so they were teaching their kids to read in their native language, and we were teaching them to read in English. And that's a superpower. And that's not a deficit. That's amazing to be able to speak multiple languages. I was just in Japan a couple of weeks ago, and I don't speak any Japanese at all, and lots of people spoke English and were able to speak with me, but I really felt how uncomfortable it is and difficult it is to not be able to speak the language that everybody else speaks. And I just couldn't be engaged in conversations that I would have liked to have been engaged in.
Yeah, and, I think that also it speaks to the power dynamics in the classroom because we in the United States, the dominant language is English. And, those who don't have command of the language, so in spoken or in written word, we have different perspectives about them. And I think that you're right. I think that we do have an opportunity to, one, reframe who has power, who has knowledge, and who doesn't, based on the recognition of the power dynamics that exist in schools anyway. And then two, at the ways in which we sort of rethink ourselves as learners now, right? Learning a new language, learning their new culture, learning their new practices, and really inviting them in to teach us. I think that's another part of the collaborative piece that can be done a lot better for many of us.
Yeah, and a lot of what we've been talking about today goes back to this idea of recognizing the individual or the individual family, the strengths they have, what they bring to the table, and what they can do already, rather than saying, here's the one bar and everybody has to meet it at this level, but rather saying, let's look at each individual situation and see what's going on. So, my last question is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you?
Ooh, I think one thing I would say a principal should do this week would be to visit a classroom. And before visiting that classroom, maybe talk with a teacher about a student who may be quote unquote a problem student in the classroom, a student who the teacher just can't quite reach. Writing down some questions that you want to ask the child based on their background, based on their family structure, based on their interest. Go into the classroom, hopefully during the time when they're playing with others, where they're not missing any instruction, and have a conversation with them. Ask them about their home life. Ask them about their favorite book. Ask them about different things that they are interested in. Really give them an opportunity to provide some education for you, some information for you. Because as a third party, right, as a person who's not in the classroom every day, the child may actually feel a little more inclined to share more with you. And as you learn more, write those things down and share them with the teacher. You might be the person who can provide some information more about the child so that when the teacher goes in to design some lessons or some centers or maybe some talking points with the families, you have a little bit more of some knowledge from the child about what it is that they're interested in. I personally, I just refuse to believe that children are the problem. I don't believe that. And I think that behavior is communication. And sometimes it does take a little more work, a little more time, a little more effort. But if you really want to be transformative, I think you can take an approach to really treat the child as a cosmopolitan intellectual. As my mentor, Dr. Campano and Dr. Giso say, we frame them as the cosmopolitan intellectuals they are, draw on their epistemologies, their knowledge, and use this for ways to improve our practice, quite honestly.
Well, having seen dozens of principals do exactly what you just said, I'm going to tell you that is a wonderful strategy because it really does work. The kids will open up and will share different things with the teacher than the principal. And that's totally appropriate and totally beneficial if we're all on the same team and have open communication between the principal, the teacher, and the parents so that we can do what is best for that student. Is there a way that you'd like people to connect with you or get more information from you, Darius?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. You just type my name in and or on Twitter. My handle on there is just my first and last name. I love to connect with folks. I love to just see what people are doing in their schools, and I might ask you like what you're reading. I love to read, so I have your book list on hand too.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Darius, for being part of Transformative Principal. Great to chat with you in this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Jethro. I appreciate it.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.